And lastly, the intro to week 2. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to this Mental Health Monday. Last week you met me. I'm Buddy Gharring. I'm a pastor. I'm not qualified to speak about any of this, but I love it. I love learning about mental health and everything. I'm hanging out with my good friend Jake Ferguson. And Jake, you shared a lot about your background last week in different degree programs that you have. You've got a certificate in positive psychology, graduate training in interpersonal neurobiology, a certificate degree from Berkeley, but also you're in another program right now. What's your current program? And also you've got this commitment to Buddhism. That's really a driving factor in your life, and it plays really well into some of these core commitments. And so I'd love, if you wanted to talk about your current program and the name of that one from Berkeley that I'm forgetting.
Okay, so yeah, I attended the Berkeley Extension Campus in Berkeley and completed my professional certificate in trauma-informed interventions. Yeah. So, and right now I'm currently going through the mindfulness-based transpersonal counseling program, and that's at Naropa, which is actually a Buddhist institution here in the United States, and that's for licensure in mental health. And as I said last week too, I love to work with people, and a lot of the path that I've been on, a lot of the hardships that I've endured have largely factored into the caregiving that I want to provide and that I aspire to provide. My mentor over 10 years ago, introduced me to Vipassana meditation, which is a Southeast Asian form of meditation through the Theravada tradition. And it has been just a profound gem and a joy in my life. One of the hardest things I've ever done and one of the most beautiful things I've ever done. So I've been a fairly committed practitioner since then. But I use it more as a philosophy rather than a theology. I like to use Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and man, like this relationship, you'll watch last week's video if you haven't seen it already, maybe. And I just treasure Jake so much, our conversations and the learning that we can do together and exploring is really fun in this topic. Well, hey, we're just going to cut right back into a conversation we were having last week. And we kind of shifted lanes at some point and started talking a little bit about acceptance and commitment therapy and specifically about how that can help us to put some distance between us and our thoughts and emotions, kind of trying to become non-judgmental outside observers of our own thoughts and emotions. And so let's jump into that conversation together. Jake and I were talking at the beginning, and I really think that one of the biggest things is compassion and self-love. Those are what is going to make this process worthwhile. It's going to make you want to do it. It's going to make it easier to do. Compassion and self-love are going to drive this. I don't know, do you want to say more, Jake, about why it's so important to engage compassionately in this work that we're doing?
Yeah, it feels like a nice time to jump in again here. I feel like Buddy is asking the question, how deep is your commitment, or how deep is your love? And I think that right now, a lot of us are being asked that question, as Buddy touched on the current times. It's a precarious time. It's alarming. And for many of us, the self-care piece is pretty fragmented. So we're getting lost in, all the online stuff and everything that we're seeing on TV, and it's not creating the right kind of resonance in terms of our nervous system. It's very escalating energy, and I think that that's a piece that we need to throw in to kind of step aside from that too, because in a way that's like the default mode network. It's just this repetitive thing that keeps going, and it doesn't really serve any purpose. And as much as Buddy and I like to talk, which is pretty obvious, we we both push ourselves to be catalysts in our communities and people that are physically, fundamentally doing things that help ourselves and help others and create the type of tolerant, integrative, wholesome communities that we want to bring children into and that we want to pass down. And I think that if you are committed to that, you need to do the things that you need to do to bring yourself into the position where you can be that person that you need to be, that your family needs or that your community needs. And a huge step in that is learning how to notice the default mode network. It's not about eliminating the default mode network. That's not going to happen. You know, we're looking at monks that have over 10,000 hours of seated meditation. They are in a different state, both when they meditate and when they walk around us. They have profoundly different brain signatures than the average person per fMRI. It's pretty crazy. So what we want to look at is bite-sized things that we can do now to notice the default mode network. And I'm going to introduce a term which comes out of the acceptance and commitment therapy literature, which we call ACT. The term is called diffusion. So to understand diffusion, you've also got to understand the concept of fusion. Fusion is when a thought or an idea comes up, an emotion, a sensation, a memory, and there's no observation of it. There's no awareness of it. It comes, it happens, and I feel like it is me. And then I immediately behave and act as if that thought or feeling or emotion is true. And it's, again, one of those things that just gets carried away. We call it buying a thought or buying an emotion. Oh, you must have bought that thought. So what we're realizing is that we can have thoughts, we can have emotions, we can have feelings without buying them. And the nature of any thought, any feeling, any emotion is impermanence. All these things that we feel, they're transient, and they go. And what we want to do is build the faculty of ourselves that can simply watch that, can observe that. So I'd like to introduce another thing, which we call a language of noticing. So for instance, this is how we practice diffusion. We use a language of noticing. I'm noticing a thought that says, I don't like what that person did. I'm noticing a thought that I feel like that person is judging me. So now built into my language is this sort of separation between the inner experience and that which observes the inner experience. And that's the diffusion piece. So when we're talking about fusion, we're talking about it coming together in that sense of fusion. And the diffusion piece is that sort of disentangling process that can occur. So the default mode network is still going to do its thing, but the way we relate to the default mode network starts to change. And what wires together, fires together. And, you know, if you repeatedly practice these things, it very slowly begins to change the fabric of the way the brain is connected within itself. And as many of you know, that's called neuroplasticity right now. The brain can change itself. It's a fact. It's not necessarily going to be growing new neurons, but the brain can certainly change the way that it's organized within itself. So again, what we're talking about is a new way of relating to our inner experiences, and we call that diffusion.
I mean, that's beautiful, like looking at that diffusion work, looking at using this language to distance ourselves from these thoughts. I love that language of noticing, being able to say that not I'm angry, but I'm noticing anger present. I'm noticing that I'd like to be angry at that person for that thing. And I know often too, when we hang out and other people in our circle too, we wind up using the language of my brain a lot. My brain is wanting to be angry, or I'm noticing my brain obsessing about, and this sort of thing gives us this personhood separate from these thoughts and feelings and emotions. It's really helpful. So, man, thanks, Jake. And I hope that everyone else out there, that you can try this week. Spend some time using noticing languaging. language. Spend some time intentionally distancing yourself from those emotions that arise and saying, no, I'm noticing that I'd like to be impatient or angry with someone I love. I'm noticing that I don't want to call and reach out to this person that really is going to need that from me right now, because I'm committing to a narrative of that being too much energy or too much work, or I'm tired or whatever. I don't know, that kind of fell off the rails there. But maybe this week we can find ways to practice this. I don't know. What's your example, Jake? How would you practice noticing language this week?
A lot like you're describing. It's actually fun to notice.
Yeah.
And I think it's a pretty intuitive process. It feels so good to realize that you are not your thoughts.
Mm.
It feels so good to realize that you are not those old memories, and to start realizing how malleable memory is. And more as we do this work, it feels so good to be here now. And that's the core of the mindfulness work, is learning how to experience the felt presence of each moment in a way that is committed and engaged. There's no talk here about being vegetables or being passive or just simply letting things happen. That's a real common misconstrual of what a lot of Buddhism is. It's very far from that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, right? The more that we can be in this moment, the more that we can be gentle and meek and all of these things that Jesus talks about all the time too, right? The more we lean into these things, the more we realize that they are very active and powerful and world transforming attributes and ways of being to lean into. I think that's beautiful. And I hope that you've found that to be true already in your life, if you're watching us. But if you haven't, then lean into this work of being present and of being here now. It takes a lot of work to focus the mind. And that's really what we're talking about. Not clearing it, just not giving it freedom to run amok and to find ways to make us miserable all day long. Instead, we're going to distance ourselves and we're going to choose what we're putting mental energy into, not wasting 50% or more of each day cycling in that default mode network like we talked about last week, right? Well, man, I think that that's such beautiful stuff. Hey, Jake, on that topic of diffusing, is there any last thing that you want to say or give to people as something that they could go home with at the end of the day today?
Yeah. You'll hear me say this whenever you and I talk about this stuff. It's that we're worth it. We're worth more than our thoughts. Not only is the brain constantly wrapped up in this default mode network, it's very negative. And a lot of the thought processes that many of us have to endure every day are so self-harming and self-damaging. And the mental health sciences are pretty clearly showing that a process of diffusing from these internal experiences is very, very freeing. And it's a very important step out of anxiety and other pathways that lead to depression. So what I want to leave us with is that we're worth it. We're worth the effort that it takes to notice these thoughts. And I don't want to demean our thoughts, but they're just thoughts. They just come and go. And they're really weird, as you know. From time to time, we just get really weird thoughts. Think of your worst thought. Ugh. Is that you? Right? Is that you? That's not you. That thought is not who you are. It's not what you are. It's a small thing that happens in an extremely complex system, but it's not you. And the more that we notice these disempowering small voices inside of us, the more we can connect with a bigger communal voice.
Oh, man, I love that. Well, hey, Jake, I want to say, man, thanks so much for having this conversation with me and I want to say to the family at Cathedral of the Rockies, everybody who's watched and listened to these, and all the places that they might be rebroadcast or reshared, thank you. Thanks for being present. Thanks for giving us the opportunity these past 2 weeks to connect with all of you. And Jake, both of these weeks ended with that idea that you're worth it. I think you are. And I love this idea that you are not your worst thoughts. You're not. Your worst thoughts or feelings you've ever had, that's not who you are. So feel that freedom to be more than that. Have a great week, guys.